lineup more or less nailed down. And I think I mentioned last time that these speakers are roughly going to be coming every 2 weeks from here on out, really, because of the number I've got lined up for you guys to be able to hear. So we'll do that today. The deadlines wise, because this has been fluid for a while. Whenever you hear somebody, and of course in your guys' case it's always going to be Tuesday, then your reflection papers due the following Sunday at midnight. Now, I realize that somebody's probably going to scream about a double whammy, having to do a journal and the speaker reflection, but tough. You guys can handle it. And I think, do we have any other questions or anything? You guys have it all? I think the way we're going to line this up is John will speak, and then if he's got a little time for Q&A, hopefully you guys can ask questions and whatnot. And once we get to some kind of conclusion with that, we'll take a break like we usually do, and then we'll get back together. And I want to try to finish some of the couple different things that aren't on your schedule, but I want to make sure we hit, particularly in light of working with people that have gone through crisis and things like that. I think ultimately we talked a little bit about boundaries, but I want to give you a background for specific boundary issues that people will have. That always comes into play when we're talking about people in crisis. If you wrestle with, or there were some things I talked about in the boundaries material that you thought, oh man, that's really a little too close to home, that stuff will come out on steroids when you're around somebody who's desperately in need. And that's why I wanted to spend the time to talk about it. So we're going to look at, in the second hour here, we're going to look at this kind of the specific boundary issues. And then some of you guys that are in grace and shame and grace, or whatever that class is called, you're going to get nailed with the safe people stuff again, because that's always got to be part of the conversation we have when we're talking about people that are wrestling with a variety of issues and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of the layout for today. So let me pray real quick, and then I'll let you know why John's here, and then we'll go from there. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this day. Thanks for your provision for us. Thank you for the safety that we can sit and listen to people like John and others that are giving of their time to come and talk to us. It's all grace. It's all the kind of thing that we can experience in real time. I pray that even as we listen to John, that our hearts would be open to what your Holy Spirit pokes at and says, this is something maybe that you can think about and look at. Maybe it's something he says that gets our heart rate moving a little faster. But help us not just to push it down, but to listen to it and to listen to what your Holy Spirit has for us today and what John has to say to us. Thank you for our opportunity to do this. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so, yes, ma'am. There are extra handouts. John and I have known each other for a decade at least. I think we were talking before I even came to CCU, and I don't remember how we met, but there was, at the time that I met John, he was working with the Boulder Sheriff's Department as a victim's advocate, and we had lots of stories to trade after I was working in the therapy world that I was in. And as I moved into here and began to teach this crisis and trauma class, I think this is probably the 6th iteration of this. I always asked John to come, partly because he was in the context that was a public organization with no ostensible kind of connection to somebody's faith or Christian faith or anything like that. So you have a situation where you have somebody who's a Christ follower walking into a place where it's not like the bubble of CCU. You walk in and you're interacting with all sorts of people, and how your faith shows itself is going to be shown not necessarily in the words you use, but how you relate. And what John has to offer you guys, I think, is a wonderful perspective about that. So John is a good friend. I am thrilled to start a semester with a friend. Not that the other ones aren't, but I know John better. So please welcome John Parks. Let me give this to you.
Thanks.
That's the rite of initiation.
Oh, okay, that's good. That's really good. Well, hi, I'm glad to be here. It's really kind of a lot of fun to come here and talk to you and everything. And it's also pretty interesting. It's kind of been an interesting journey, and there's really 3 parts to this. There's the first part, which is the crisis and trauma part, and then there's kind of my story and how I've lived that out and kind of gone through that. And then it's what you take away from this and how it impacts you and how it affects you and how you look at the world maybe hopefully differently after we're finished talking and engaging. Went to college, didn't have anything to do with counseling, didn't have anything to do with faith. It was CSU. I ended up with a master's degree in history because I loved history and it was really fun. And I've gotten to use it some, and even in my normal job. I have a normal job building roads. That's what I've done for a long time. Worked for a home builder for 8 years, but just kind of asphalt, concrete, and that kind of stuff. But that's what's allowed me to do the crisis work too, because the stuff I did in the sheriff's department was really intense. And then also, as we go along, ask questions. You know, since this, I really want it to be for you. I want you to be throwing out your ideas as we go along. So feel free to stop me at any point and ask a question about what's going on and what you're thinking and feeling. And then also, this is kind of the worst stuff ever. A victim advocate we were with the sheriff's department, and we went out on calls. We were dispatched through the 911 people, and we responded to all kinds of things with the sheriff's department anytime they needed help with something. And they would call us, and we would come in. They would do all the technical, legal, criminal kind of stuff, and we would just help the people that we were called to be with. It was pretty intense stuff. It was some of the worst stuff around, and that's what we were left with, and that's what we did. And if you were the right kind of person, it was the coolest thing in the world. A lot of people would hear about the things that we did and kind of want to run away. And then also kind of like Dr. Mitsch was talking about self-care and boundaries and things. That's really important in this world because of the people that we're dealing with. And that's about it for the introduction. Most people don't know when their ministries or their lives were going to change. And I've got an actual date because mine started with a newspaper article in the Boulder Daily Camera. You can't really see these people very well, but it was a story about this couple that was moving into a brand new home, and as they were moving in, Kim and Marcia, as they were moving in, the moving truck was in the driveway, and they were moving stuff in the house. Their daughter was going through the new house and kind of fumbling around. She went out on the back deck. She fell off the deck and hit her head on concrete 8.5 feet below. They didn't know anybody in Boulder County. They were completely lost. They were completely alone, and they had no one here. And the sheriff's guys came up, the ambulance came, everything came. But they had the advocate program that was in place with the sheriff's department. It was pretty much brand new. It was like a year old at that point. And these people swooped in. They took care of them. They found them a new place to stay. They got their stuff stored. They sat with them at the hospital. They sat with them in the hospital while they made the decision to turn off life support, and Erfel passed away. And this story was in here, in the newspaper, and I read it in December of 1987. Then the second part of this is they said, there was another part that said the victim assistance program was looking for new volunteers. When I saw that, it resonated with me because I'd been in some of these hard situations with people in church and not known what to do. And this program offered 40 hours of training and gave me an opportunity to learn something about all these difficult situations where people were. The other thing that worked really good for me is I was reading through the Bible on one of these scheduled things where you read through it and everything. And in that time, I came on the passage in Luke where it told the story of the Good Samaritan and what it is to be a person connected with God and caring about other people. And that whole story fit in exactly with this because this is what they were. The Good Samaritan doesn't really preach, doesn't talk. He just shows up and loves this guy really well. So it's pretty profound and really significant. in how it all played out. I did my first call almost 31 years ago, and it was a call to go with the coroner's office and do what we called a death notification, where we would meet with the coroner's investigator. Somebody had died, and actually the person had committed suicide, and we had to track down his mom and go tell her that her son had passed away, and do it with as much grace and kindness and love as possible. When we met, I met with the investigator ahead of time. We made a game plan. He'd asked me if I'd done any other calls, and I hadn't. And my partner, who was supposed to show me how to do the calls, didn't show up. And so it was just me and him. And I think he was disappointed in the beginning because he was like, oh, here's a rookie. We're going into this really hard situation. And we went off and did it. And the most important part of that first call for me was just that caring for people in the middle of their really hard situations really shows through. And she could tell I cared for her and was worried about her. He did all of the main talking, explained how they'd found the car with the exhaust hooked up into the cab of the car, and found her son, that he was dead inside. She knew he was missing. She called in looking for him and everything. So in some ways, she was relieved to know something. She also knew how depressed he had been, how sad he had been, and how he'd been struggling really a great deal. So we finished the call. Everything went pretty smoothly, and we went off, took her home. We got her family there, and we met with them and kind of explained what he knew about had gone on in the different details, and gave her that information. And things worked pretty well. I've been out of this world for 8 years, and I stepped back and just started doing other things, other ministry things. That's worked out really good. But 3 years after I left the program, I was on a trip in Cambodia with the men in my men's group, and we were driving down the road. I don't know if you've ever been to third world countries. Traffic's crazy, and buses or things are flying by. They have these big things called iron buffalo. It's a big kind of a tractor thing they use to haul stuff around in farms. And there was an iron buffalo coming this way, and we were behind a bus going this way. And the bus just started to swerve over, and it hit the iron buffalo. And the 8 guys that I was with on this trip, we watched people fly off the iron buffalo. We watched them hit the ground. We watched this disaster come up. It had been 3 years since I'd been in the advocate program. And that fast, all the stuff I'd seen, all the trauma, all the experiences, all the memories came back. And it was pretty intense for a short period of time. I didn't realize a person could get that bloody that fast. But these guys are really hurt. Probably 2 of them died. But it all brought it out for us. It was a huge thing, and really a difficult time. And a difficult time for all of us, for me, because it tied into the past things that I'd experienced. That's one thing that trauma does. It connects the dots of your life in the past to your life now. And also, that's another thing that's really good to bring up in this moment. I know some of you have been through really hard things and in difficult times, and that stuff stays with you for a long time. And it's hard to manage a lot of times. And this conversation may bring up some of that stuff. So if it does, it's really important to connect with somebody, to tell your story a little bit, and invite somebody into that for you, because carrying it inside by yourself is really difficult. And it changes who you are. That's what I've seen in this, in different men's ministry things that I've been involved with. It impacts people in really profound ways, and really hard ways. It just changes how we deal with the world and causes issues later on. Anybody have any questions at this point? Okay, good. So, these are really difficult things. And advocacy is much different than therapy. I hope you start to get that. We're not doing therapy. We're not trying to get into the deep stuff of what's going on in their lives. We're just trying to be there and be present with them. This is kind of what they found out at the Columbine shootings. Advocates showed up and therapists showed up. Therapists wanted to do therapy and kind of get into the deeper stuff. Advocates just wanted to be present and care for these people and help them and love them and respect them. And it was the hugest difference in the world. what I wanted to do is give them comfort, whatever that looked like. The one good part about the kind of trauma work that we did helping these people is they didn't really fake things. In therapy, people can fake things and pretend and be different kind of people, but in these situations, it's so real and so difficult and so emotional. The real person pretty much shows through as to what you see there is what this person really is. You got the handout, and it's a handout about grief and pain on the front page, and talks about different phases of it and different parts of it. It's really significant. The second page kind of shows this tangled ball of emotion, and that's really what grief is about. It's all kinds of things. Rage, anger, pain, emptiness, anguish, loneliness, sorrow, loss, betrayal, fear, anger, woe, envy. It's a lot of those kind of things, and they all come back at you. I got this from a gentleman that I met doing group crisis intervention, and he had kind of walked through this, and he had his own program to do stuff. His information is on there. It's probably about 10 years old. And then the second page of the is critical incident stress information sheet. And this is 2 pages, front and back, and it's some of the best stuff that I've ever found about this. I got it as part of a whole class that I took about group crisis intervention. Jeff Mitchell was one of the groundbreaking guys in dealing with group crisis intervention when people had been exposed to one kind of event altogether. And he kind of tapered it to firefighters and police officers that had all been exposed to something pretty bad that happened all in front of them, right there with them. And it taught them how to walk through a whole process together as they went. But this information is profoundly valuable and really important that you can use all the time in many relationships and many contexts. It gives you physical, intellectual, emotional, and behavioral traits, information, words that defines that and speaks to those things. And these are both really, really important things to try to provide help and care for other people when you're in these kind of situations. Advocacy is more of an art than it is a science. And we just kind of figured out in the beginning when I joined the Sheriff's Department, that was kind of the beginning of advocacy in Colorado. It was one of the first programs to start, and it was one of the first things to get people going. And it's actually pretty amazing that with 40 hours of training, they would let you go out and get involved in people's lives. It was really profound, and it was really cool, and it sort of changed my perspective on almost everything in life. Up until then, I'd kind of been a selfish, self-seeking person that kind of did what I wanted to do for me and didn't worry about other people or didn't think about other people or didn't really care about other people too much. And once I started to get into this world, it kind of changed everything about how I saw things, and I started helping in a lot of venues, caring for people differently and watching over people in a lot of different ways that turned out to be really, really, really helpful and really good. I can only speak about the Boulder Sheriff's Department and how it used to be. I left because we had some changes in leadership and things changed dramatically. I've been there through 3 different leaders and everything worked out good, and we just were this creative bunch of great people working really hard at doing what was going to come next and just doing the next right thing. We kind of spurred each other on. It's kind of the same thing that happens if you start a church brand new too. You have all this energy released and everybody just jumps in, and it becomes a really cool experience. And that's what we were doing. We were creating all these things on the fly as we went and figuring it out as we went, and it was pretty profound and really significant. All the advocates were volunteers. We were just regular people that kind of had a heart to do things like this. We were just drawn to it, and they did really good screening and touched bases with people, figured out who they were, and figured out their motivations and everything really well. So we had a really tight group of really committed people who really genuinely cared about people. The situations that we dealt with were all kinds of things. Domestic violence situations, those were usually where a couple was in a not the best relationship and they would end up, there's a regular domestic violence kind of cycle where they're real close and then they have a blow up and then they're far away and then they drift back closer together again and then they blow up again, and it's kind of how it works out. So the ones we were involved with were usually the violent ones. Usually the male was arrested or he ran away and they tried to arrest him and track him down. And then the woman was just there. We did suicides, like I mentioned before. We were involved with sexual assaults, crimes against people, all kinds of accidents, climbers that fell down mountains, car accidents where people were injured or killed. And then we also did unintended deaths where somebody just died and they needed people to be there and to notify next of kin. That was a whole other part of it, was death notifications with the coroner's office. So we worked with the sheriff's department, highway patrol, and the coroner's office, and then different agencies within Boulder County. Most of them were pretty difficult. We got 40 hours of training, and in the training we learned about listening skills, ethics, values, grief and loss, different cultures, the legal system, victim rights, working with children and teens, vicarious trauma, something about PTSD. It was kind of a new field 30 years ago, and they were just kind of figuring out a lot of the details about it, but that's kind of what the training covered. I remember, too, really well, probably 3 weeks into the 4 weeks of training, I was kind of wondering, we've got all this training, but what are we really doing? And one of my friends in the program that was going through it too, Michelle, came up and said, we've got all this training, but what do we really do on call? We've learned all this stuff. And after a while, her answer and my answer had come to the same thing, that we're mostly just there with the people. We're present with the people that we're with as much as they'll allow us, and we care for them as much as they'll allow us. They kind of lead us and we kind of follow. And after doing it for 23 years, that's what we did mostly all the time. That was the most important thing that we brought to the situation. And we're also volunteers too. That was really significant too. I don't know if you've volunteered much. I hadn't until this. But volunteering is really a strong thing to do. Even in the church, once you attach a paycheck to your faith, it changes things. And it makes it sort of different. You may not have had those experiences, but I've seen it and I've experienced it. So it was really a special thing that we were all there together. And it was also that we got to be a part of something that was so creative and exciting and interesting. Kind of flowed along. So we were there. An old comedian had a saying one time that said, 90% of life is showing up, is just being present. And after having done that for a long time in these calls and just with friends in every part of life, I think he's probably right. Just being present, being aware, being connected, and caring about people is probably the most important thing that we get to do. And Brene Brown, have you seen her TED Talks and things? She's pretty amazing. Wrote the book Daring Greatly and has written some other books that have gone on beyond that and everything. But she says connection is the reason that we're here. And it's what gives us meaning and purpose in our life, connecting with each other and other people. And I found that on these calls, that's the same thing. It's really, really important. Our presence is really, really important. And on these calls, too, being present and being aware and caring is really important. And if people can sense that, they just automatically open up and respond to who you are and what you have to share and everything. It's really profound. And really early on, I'd wondered why people were able, to share stuff. You would come up and you would ask a couple questions, and then they would just start to tell you a whole long story. And it was really profound and really significant. And after doing it for a while, I started to realize that that it was because of how we presented ourselves and showed up. That 92% of communication that they say is the most important part of the communication is nonverbal, and it's our tone and our body language. And I realized that it started when the calls would first come in on the pager, that they would say, go to this place to do this, connect with officer so-and-so, connect with someone from the coroner's office. And when I would see that, I would start to feel what that would feel like to have maybe a child die or have somebody in a car accident that I didn't know how it was going to work out. And when I felt that, I kind of internalized it and took it in. And then when I met the people, they could see that in me, that I genuinely cared, that I could feel for them, and that gave them the feeling of safety and security to be open and share the things that they had going on. And that was the reason. It was a really important reason, but they could see why I was there and what I was going to do, and the possibility that I could help them. They set the stage for opening up and sharing and helping them to feel safe.
Sorry, quick question for you.
Sure.
I apologize.
No.
How did you survive all that feeling? How did you do it?
No, that's a really good point, and it's a really important part. And that's what I kind of alluded to in the beginning, building roads,
Yeah.
because I would be on call 1 weekend a month, and so that would be from Friday night at 6 to Monday morning at 6. And whatever happened in Boulder County, I would go do the call. And I had a partner, so we would be there together. Also, we had backup if 2 calls went off at the same time, so we didn't have to handle everything that came through. But then after that, we had 2 meetings a month, and they were debriefings where we were in a big circle and you would share about what happened in the call, what you did, and we'd be able to support each other. So we were able to support each other, we were able to care for each other, and you had a partner that you cared for, and then you got friends in the group that you were really close to, so that they, when you told your story about calls, they were able to feel it for you and be able to do that. Plus then for me, I would go back to building roads, digging holes and filling them up, and working with a whole bunch of other people that's all they did. So it was okay. It usually took at least a week, maybe 2 weeks to kind of settle down after the things that had happened on the weekend, because it was so intense and usually hard. Sometimes I'd go to a funeral if I had made a special connection with the people. A few times I was asked to speak at funerals. One time they had a chaplain that came and the people asked me to speak at the funeral. He said, he's the religious guy, but you're the spiritual guy. And it was really pretty much an honor. But I got it, You know what? Sometimes pastors are like, this is a whole different kind of that piece. But with having the groups, the friends, the closeness, and only being on call 1 weekend a month. We had therapists that would join the program every once in a while, but I don't know how they even joined. But they were thinking, this is another avenue. But it was too much to carry that stuff during the week, and then to do this at night or weekends other times. Other questions? Yeah.
What kinds of people would join the group, background-wise?
It was really interesting. It was a really diverse group. You would think there'd be a lot of Christians in it. And even when I found this article, I was thinking, wow, how many Christians read this article? And there were only a few that showed up. It was mostly people that had been through some hard things themselves, and that's part of my story, but had been through some hard things themselves, and then just had a heart to do that thing. A lot of people, it was funny, the people that did it, we were really enthusiastic about it, but if you were at a party and you started to mention that, the place would just get quiet. Everybody would go, oh my gosh, who would ever want to think about doing something like that? Because they just couldn't really relate to it. So there's a lot of different backgrounds. One woman I remember when I was in my first group, she said, I had 9 kids and the last one was almost perfect, so I guess I'm qualified to do this now. So that's why she was there. And people did it for different reasons. If you were motivated by a good reason, usually you stayed with it and did a lot of really valuable things. But it was really hard to say. It was mostly, for me, it was just how I was made. And it fit me really well too, because I had a heart to do this. But then also the thing that helped me was that I was born in Colorado, but my formative years were in Massachusetts near Boston, and those were hard people there. And so I kind of got this hard crust on my, so I can kind of go either way. And so that was really beneficial. I didn't get lost in the pain of what was going on, and I could help and see the value of helping. But then kind of this, and that was, even officers told me, we really don't get you, because you do the touchy-feely stuff, but you're also sort of like us. You know, you can just gut it out and get through things and stuff. Yes?
You mentioned that like the advocates are different than the therapists. I'm just curious, like what's like a defining thing that would have been like different in that kind of situation?
Well, first of all, therapists get a lot of training, and we only got 40 hours. And in therapy, it's more delving into the deeper parts of a person and really looking at this. Advocacy is therapeutic, is tremendously therapeutic. And if people have a chance to tell their story in the moment, right when it's going on and what's happening, it sets the stage for them being able to heal from these things tremendously. So, you know, while advocacy is therapeutic, therapy goes into the deeper things, deeper reasons, deeper motivations. And I know that if our advocacy and the therapeutic part of our advocacy was done immediately, it helped people process stuff later on and not hold on to it in the same way. We did have huge lists of referrals too, that we had referrals for almost everything that anybody could have deal with. Hospice in Boulder County was a great resource if somebody passed away. There were all kinds of people, therapists and different agencies that were all involved with these things that we could refer to them. People didn't normally go to hospice right away, though. It usually took almost a year after they'd experienced the death, of some of it not coping well, some of it just till they were ready to share those kind of things. But we had all kinds of resources. I think advocacy now, at least in the Boulder Sheriff's Office, is a lot different than what we did before. They kind of rely more on the different groups and not as much on this emotional stuff that I'm talking about right now. Is there another question? Yes?
What were the ages, like the range of ages of people who were victims advocates?
They wanted you to be 21 to start, and in general they were usually older. And in this, and in, I guess I've taken a couple counseling classes after this, you would see stuff in people's lives, and it was actually even kind of hard to imagine. But you know, sometimes people would be sexually assaulted in younger years, and then it would start to come out in their 30s. And I knew a couple people that didn't even remember the assaults because they'd so much blocked it out. And in their 30s, it would just start to spring out, and there was no keeping it, and they weren't sure why. But so most of the advocates were older than 35, I guess is what I'm trying to get to. It's just the way it worked out, because once you started managing your life, but the majority were probably in their 40s. I started when I was 32, so that was probably pretty young for that. But a lot of them had to have a certain amount of life experiences before they even felt comfortable doing these kind of things. And you know, you kind of had to get to a point of self-awareness too. Through my 20s, I was self-absorbed, and I wasn't prepared to do things like this. Anything else? Yes?
As like a victim's advocate, was it ever hard for you to go into certain situations as like a male, or like especially with a female victim?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it was really interesting too. Normally you would think yes. And in some situations it was. But a lot of times, like that nonverbal stuff, they could just sense that I was safe and that I cared about them. And in some of those situations, that would bridge the gap of the problem of me being a guy. And if we could get across that, it was extra comforting for the people, for the women, because they realized here's a safe guy to counteract what just happened and things. And it wasn't designed. We always had a man and woman. I would always had a female partner. I was never on call with a man for that exact reason. So we could always offer him a woman. And then we also had rape crisis team. It's called another name in Boulder now. But they were there too The way it worked, though, and domestic violence, we weren't really supposed to handle all domestic violence calls. There was a safe house in Boulder. But these other two groups had different criteria for showing up. We always showed up 100% of the time. So they would call us, and then we would try and get these other groups involved if they were available and if they could get through their protocols to be there with us. Like a domestic violence, the domestic violence people would never go to a home if the perpetrator was still free, because he could come back there, and they didn't want to expose their advocates to that. We would always go to the home, but we had officers there with us, so we were protected. Does that make sense? So, so we would try and get the sexual assault team involved as soon as we could, so that they would have direct help with the people that could help them. And if they were going to go through a sexual assault exam, we always got those people involved. Good questions, really good questions. Anything else? Yeah.
So if you have like a civilian that's on the scene, like comforting somebody involved in the situation, but like wasn't involved themselves, how do you guys as victim advocates handle that?
Now, if we just had some person there that was...
Yeah, so like I've seen instances where there's an accident on the highway, and so people will pull over and either help medically or like emotionally help other people involved in the wreck who maybe aren't as severely injured.
Mm-hmm.
So as a victim's advocate, what would you do with maybe a civilian who's jumped in and started serving that role? Yeah,
we would do the same thing for them as we did for the primary victims. You know, you'd kind of triage it, so you'd pick the family in the group that needed the help most. But we get their phone numbers and track them down, because that's a really good example. That a lot of times people, you always hear about, they found a body, you know, someplace. And then the guy that found it, he always goes home and says, "Oh, I'm fine, everything's okay." And then like later on that day he realizes, "Oh my gosh, I found a body." And so they need help down the road. And it's the same sort of, it's kind of vicarious trauma, a spectator or somebody on the side. And so we would connect with them. And on big scenes that attracted a lot of people, we'd call backup for that scene too, so we could get more people. And then if it even got bigger, like those fires they had in Boulder in 2010, we would mobilize, you know, dozens of people to do stuff, because everybody would be really, but we'd treat them exactly the same, because they would have experienced similar kind of trauma in helping. Anything else? So we'd affirm them, whatever they were thinking, feeling, just to be on their side. Give them care. One of the most important things, I alluded to some of my own stuff just before this, the summer before I volunteered. We had, my wife and I we'd been in a car accident, and our car was totaled and my wife was injured. My son had fractured his skull in the grocery store, and we'd also had a miscarriage. And those three things back to back to back. And we were well connected in church. We had a lot of friends. We had a lot of people there with us. But we still ended up feeling alone, because they didn't know how to reach out. And even though they were church friends, they were uncomfortable with it. And that was kind of a difficult thing. And that's part of the reason, you know, that when I saw this, was like, I didn't want other people to feel alone. And so that's always been sort of my motivation in helping, is to signify people that there are people there that can care and help you get help. We wanted to show them that we were there by being there. I wanted to connect and let them lead and we follow. They were really good at showing us what they needed. We'd try and be there, be present physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually as much as they would allow us. And it started by putting myself in the place that they were. You know, I don't know if you've thought about it, but it's a really profound thing. I remember learning about it in a composition class in college. And he talked about show and tell in our writing, you know, and there's show and tell, you know, little kids in elementary school bringing their thing and show and tell. Everybody was always interested in the show part. The telling wasn't that usually significant, but the show, you know, some kid brings in, you know, his father's World War II or Vietnam, you know, era military uniform or something. That was always exciting. So I always wanted to try and show people as well as tell them, but to show them that I cared by my presence, by the things I did, and by the things, and then to take action and help them to take action too in how they were coping and what they were doing. Mother Teresa said that we're supposed to preach the gospel all the time, when necessary, use words. And so we get to show people that we love them and care about them a lot. And just like the trips to Cambodia that we made, we go there to build a wall, to love the orphans, to build a fence, but we got to show them that we were there, that we came halfway around the world to love these kids. And that was really, really profound. And the really cool part is that they got to love us back. That's kind of become my definition of ministry anymore, is that as you're doing something for somebody, caring for somebody, or doing something for somebody, that you get blessed at the same time, and it kind of flows really naturally. And it's a really beautiful thing the way it happens. Wanted to keep people from being isolated. I wanted to listen to them with my heart, not just with my ears, and then respond from my heart too. We've kind of been trained in our world a lot of times that when somebody goes through something hard, we tell them, if you need anything, give me a call. And from being an advocate, I realized people never call. It's way less than 1% that people ever call. They don't want to bother you. They're uncomfortable and stuff. And being an advocate showed me you just go. And I kind of learned to just go. And so I even just go now. When something happens, a friend, right now, and we've got a lot of crazy things going on, but one friend has his son in Children's Hospital. And he's been diagnosed with a really hard disease. And two of us just went that night, bam. It was like, okay, we're there, and to show that we cared and listened and kind of walked through the first stages of having a sick child together. And it's really important. So, that's, unless you feel comfortable, it's kind of a scary thing to just go. But it can be really powerful and really important. And the other thing about just going, if you go and they really don't want you there, you can usually tell. And so you can leave. But you still showed them that you came. And so you don't need to go and stay and be solid the whole time. But that is really, really important. And it's one of the things that that's really important to know and to think about. All the stuff that we figured out 30 years ago and we're doing, a friend sent me an email recently. I think her name was Heather Pleff. It was just a thing that he had found. And it was she called it Holding Space. And it was a 3-page thing that she'd written out about this care that their family had been given and they'd given to other people. And she just said it was what they defined as holding space. And it was coming alongside of another person without judgment, without making them feel inadequate, not trying to fix them or the situation, not trying to create a predetermined outcome, helping them to feel safe, to give them control, and to rely on their own wisdom to make decisions. So that's kind of a modern era vision of what we figured out a long time ago. And it was really profound. We're kind of reinventing this stuff, but we figured it out a long time ago. In these situations, people really need a sense of control. And I've seen it so many times on calls that I didn't really get it for a long time. But like on one call, there's been a car accident. This man was driving down the road. A car ran a red light, blindsided him. He got killed. 2 hours later, I'm with his wife, and you're kind of caring for her, listening, and all of a sudden she feels safe enough to share the story. So she goes, "I killed my husband." And you're going, "What's going on?" And you're like, "You weren't even there. How did you kill your husband?" And so first of all, you kind of like, that's out there. But anyway, so then if you're a wise advocate and been doing it a while, you go, "Well, tell me about that." Or, "What do you mean?" And she goes, "Well, he was going to the store to get ice cream for me." And you're like, okay, he was going to get ice cream for you, but he wasn't driving the car. There was nothing extraordinary going on. It was just, he was going to and so our tendency is to try and talk people out of that. talk people out of that idea and convince them that they weren't at fault. But I found that if you tried to, they would just hold on to it more. Because what they really need in this moment is control. And what they would do a lot of times is to try and get control when they have no control, is to go back before the accident and take control by saying if he wasn't going to get the ice cream, he wouldn't have died, and so everything would be okay. But that control is false to start with. Plus, it makes them responsible for the accident and responsible for their husband going away. And so those are the kind of things that are a little precarious, and those are the things that people end up in therapy about, down the road after they've told themselves for a year that it was their fault. And you really, there's no good way to talk them out of it, and after a while you learn you don't even try. But what I would try and do is create some doubt in their mind, just to plant seeds of doubt in the moment, because that's all we had. We had just had the time we were there. So I'd ask them, I would do things like, was he just going to the store for the ice cream? Is that the only reason? And then they would almost always say, no, and no, he was going to do this for himself, or he wanted to go by this other store too. It's like, okay, so he wasn't just going for the ice cream. And was he a safe driver? Oh, yeah, always a safe driver. And he hadn't had a ticket in 20 years, and all those kind of things. So and it wasn't his fault. It was the other person that drove through just to try and create those doubts in their mind. And that's the best you can do a lot of times. But it just does show how important control is in these times when you don't have any control. It's something that we all really want, and we need. So the more control you can give them in these moments, the better too. Like ask them if they need things, if there's somebody that needs to be called, and that you can help them make the calls. You can do whatever needs to be done to try and give them that information. A lot of this stuff that was really important to me, and kind of gets back to your question about how we handle this stuff, is the vulnerability piece. That they could see that we were vulnerable and that we were willing to take risks and to be with them. And then that allowed them to kind of catch our lead of being vulnerable and opening up about what had happened. And those things kind of went hand in hand, and they were really important and really powerful ways to show people that you genuinely cared. And it was about being compassionate and caring. And I've got a couple of quotes by a guy that wrote an amazing book, but he's kind of gone off the rails, so I don't even want to tell you his name. His name's Eric Greitens, but he wrote a book, The Heart and the Fist, and he speaks to a lot of these things. He went to a lot of crisis areas, and he was a humanitarian in Bosnia, Rwanda, Bolivia, and Cambodia, helping people in all those places that all experienced traumatic cultural trauma and genocide in some pretty horrific ways. But he talks about courage to go do these things. He says there's a number of definitions of courage, but now I was seeing it as the simplest form. You do what needs to be done day after day, and you never quit. He said, I've learned that courage and compassion are two sides of the same coin. That without courage, compassion falters, and without compassion, courage has no direction. And then Brene Brown has some quotes about courage that are really important here too. Courage starts with showing up, kind of like we said before, and letting ourselves be seen, that vulnerability piece. And she also said that only when we're brave enough to explore the darkness will we would discover the infinite power of our own light. Courage is really, really important in these things. C.S. Lewis said that courage is not simply one of the virtues, but is the form of every virtue at the testing point. Winston Churchill rightly esteemed says courage is rightly esteemed as the first of human qualities because it's the one that guarantees all the rest. And I think God wants us to be strong and courageous too. In the first chapter of Joshua, he says be strong and courageous 4 times. There's only 18 verses. So he's pretty committed to that idea of vulnerability and courage in the same moment. Okay, so the spiritual part of advocacy. That since I was a Christian, I love Jesus, and I want to do what he wants me to do. And I was lucky enough to be in this program, being the Good Samaritan to people every month. It was really a great opportunity to really love and bless people without the pressure of being without the pressure of being the spiritual person, because the spiritual people are under a lot of pressure in these kind of situations. Some people would call their pastor and things, and they're not used to it. They don't know what to deal with it, and then also they're the ones that kind of get the why question. And in these calls, there's no answer to the why question. They're just, you can figure out a logistical reason that stuff happened, but the big overall why question. And so it was really hard on pastors to be there. So I really like not being that guy. Because it was really difficult. That being said, there were different times that that God did come up and in really profound ways. A lot of times people would be mad at God, and I was kind of too some of those times like that. But one of the times that I was called to the hospital in Boulder, and there was a group of women around there. And if you've been a Christian in a community for a long time, you know, kind of have a feel for it. And a few of those women were serious Christian women. You know, they would think nothing of praying for something for a couple hours. And they're gathered around, and there was a guy from this church there, and he was like probably an elder or maybe a pastor, but he was trying to be the spiritual guide for them, and these really powerhouse Christian women. What had happened is one of the women's husband had passed away, and these women were there just supporting her. She wasn't with this group. I'm not sure why exactly, but she wasn't part of the group, and this guy's being the spiritual guy. And you know, saying some spiritual stuff and everything. And I was thinking, I wouldn't want to be him with this powerhouse of Christian women. And then one of them put up her hand and said, when do we pray for him to come back to life? And yeah, he blew him right out of the saddle. And that was pretty much the end of him being the guide. But it gave me an opportunity later on, as you're talking to people, to tell her, you know, that's a really good question. I've wondered about that a lot. And she said, could we do it? And I was like, well, I can get you in the room. And she said, okay. So we charged in there and prayed for him to come back to life. And he didn't come back to life. If he did, you would already know about me, because we would have been in the papers everywhere. But he didn't come back to life. But we did what that was on that woman's heart to do. And then later on, that was one of the ones that I went to a funeral with. And at the funeral, I met that woman again. And she told the wife that we had done that. And it made all the difference in the world for her. The wife wanted to be able to do stuff like that. And it made all the difference in the world that we were able to do that for her. And that was one of the really, really special kind of things and I think those things probably happened a lot. We just didn't really get to see about them or know about them. There was another time that I did a call, and a gentleman had passed away, and the wife was left there, and she told a story about how she'd had dinner a few, I guess it was the week before he had passed away, and at the dinner that a couple people had, it was she and her husband and another couple and her husband, and in the process of the whole thing, they've been talking about God, and do you believe in God? And both the women said, yeah, we believe in God and Jesus. And both the men weren't certain. And so in the middle of all this stuff, we found out that we're going to the same church at the same time and everything. And so then the thing was mulling over in her mind, and so she came up to me and told me that story. So last week we talked the story. My husband wasn't sure about it, and the other husband wasn't sure. And then she asked me point blank, where is he now? And there's a question you don't want to get, but that's a question that's really hard for pastors. And I'm not the Bible answer man. You know, some people know every verse and everything for that. That's not me. And even things I memorized 3 weeks ago. I'm having trouble remembering right now. But I did have the concept there that that maybe this is the time where it says the faith of the wife sanctifies the husband, and the faith of the husband sanctifies the wife. Because it did say that, it does say that, and I thought I could get that idea. But that set the stage and changed everything for her too. And she looked up the verses, found them, and she uses it in her testimony, years later, telling people about what a difference it made in that moment. And there were bunches of other times that I've run into people. It wasn't so much the spiritual aspect of what we got to do, but just how they were so appreciative, just randomly running into them in the grocery store, and how they just said how it impacted them. And I've stayed in touch with, I still meet with the best advocates in the program. Every month we get together for coffee, and they all have stories just like that it was transformative things. Plus, I also started, it was funny, I guess probably my second or third year of being an advocate, I realized, I should pray for these people ahead of time. And that would be a really good idea. And so I started doing that, and that started off with a big bang. That worked out really good. Because that first day I was laying in the chiropractor, that's in the office where I got that epiphany. Started praying ahead of time, and that night we had a little boy got run over by a car. And he'd been backed over, and the car actually stopped on top of him, and then pulled forward because it was just so traumatic and everything. And he had a big abrasion in his back, and we went to the hospital and everything. And he and I ended up playing catch in the ER that night. He was really in good shape. Everything worked good. It's like, wow, this praying really works. And it worked in that case. There have been a lot of tragic times with prayers too, but at least I knew I was doing my part to pray for the people ahead of time, and then silently there, and then prayed for them afterwards, sometimes for a long time, sometimes for years, if the things played out right, and if I knew them. Early on, it didn't feel like official ministry since it wasn't in the church, but it really was. It was kind of the best ministry ever, because there wasn't that pressure to perform and be the Christian guy and be the Bible answer man and stuff. And it's real similar to the stuff in Cambodia. This church in Cambodia that we go and work with, it's pretty incredible. They was a small little church in Phnom Penh, and one day somebody just threw some orphans on their doorstep, and they went into the orphan business. And the pastor of the church said, "Oh, now we've got these orphans," so they took in these orphans. And so it's just a completely secular thing. Who knew that you could even put orphans on a doorstep in Cambodia? But they did. So they started an orphanage, and when they took in the orphans, the church started to grow. So these just secular orphans were the beginning of this church growing. The church started about 20 years ago, and this was, I don't even know how long ago this was, but when our men's group started going over to the church, they had around 106 orphanages all over Cambodia, so that started to grow. And then the orphanages was a big reason that the church started to grow. And so because of taking on the orphans and seeing the orphans different, the church started to grow, so that 6 years ago when we started going, there were 600,000 people in this church. So it went from like 50 to 600,000 in like 15 years. And the orphans were a big part of it. It was pretty amazing. So God really used those few orphans that ended up on the doorstep in powerful ways. Now the number is even bigger. They're saying 700,000 or 800,000 people in the church. That church is scattered all across Cambodia, every place. And it's pretty amazing and pretty powerful. So God does use the secular all the time to help us get where He wants us to be. And then the story there. One of the really important parts of being an advocate that we've kind of touched on a little bit is just the motivation to be there. And have you seen that one TED Talk, Simon Sinek? I think it's called How great leaders inspire action. And he talks about motivation for things. And the motivation is really the critical piece in being an advocate. Why you're there, what you want to do, because a lot of our drive as an advocate team came from our motivation. And some people would get in it for different reasons. But the reason that you're there is really because that's where all your helping comes from. If you genuinely care for people, your motivation is just better and stronger, and rather than as opposed to just being there for other reasons, like wanting to know more about how it works or death or any of those things. Your motivation drives it all, and that's what Simon really puts out in his thing. Yes?
How do you incorporate like the spiritual aspect with non-believers, or do you just kind of wait for them to bring it up or ask questions? Or
Yeah, it's really an interesting thing, because some people are active non-believers and stuff. So you kind of feel them out, and you kind of learn after a while because they're so used to people telling them stuff. But you can kind of, like that woman that we found out we went to the same church. You know, that's just the kind of connection that we had there. And it was really interesting because even being the non-believers, the connection and the care shone through, that they could feel it. There was one young man passed away, and I was really well connected with him, and he just died. He just died. I didn't even know that could have happened. They couldn't even find a reason. But I went to the service that they had for him and everything, and they had handed out cards at the service so you could write notes for the family. And so I wrote this note that just said, you know, what I found out about your son from all of his friends was that he was an amazing young man, and he was profound. And then at the end of it I said, you know, God bless, and signed my name. Well, then I found out later from another advocate that knew the family that they were active atheists, and they didn't believe in God, and they were kind of hostile toward God. And I thought, oh man, and that's what I put on the card. I should have thought that through a little better. But I ended up having contact with them later on, and I think I put my phone number on the card, and they called me, and the fact that the care that they received from me trumped the fact that I put something on the card that they didn't agree with, and they just responded really well, and they were very kind and very thoughtful to me, even though I was coming out of left field. So that's really the beauty of loving in a non-secular way. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The questions? Yeah.
So, most likely you probably saw things that, just, how did you handle, like, did you, like, ever see something so much that you're like, I doubt God, like, I doubt his, it's not to your justice or whatever you would say. How would you handle that in that situation?
You know, I'm trying to think if I've really had that experience. You know, it was more being mad at God. Like, what are you doing? You know, this is those kind of things. And that's really different than doubting him, because it's like, you know, I know you love me. I know you love this family. I know that. And I've seen you do amazing things. And still, there's a dead child here. And so, in the beginning, maybe there was some doubt in the beginning, doubt of what he's doing, for sure, and doubt how he's acting and how his will is being played out in this moment. But not so much doubt, more just anger. And he says to be angry, you know, be hot or cold. It's like, okay, you're getting hot now. And but then he could deal with that, and really telling him you're angry at him is not a bad thing, because he can take it. You really can. Yes?
Have you ever been in a situation, or what would you do in a situation where, whether acting in your capacity as an advocate or just with somebody you knew, you were with somebody as they were trying to work through a crisis, and you didn't feel like emotionally in the right place to kind of help them or to handle what they were dealing with? Like, how would you respond to that?
Yeah, that's really hard, and it's hard to even know how that works. My son-in-law, and it's a long story, but anyway, there's a guy that he's been through some really hard stuff, and he won't take responsibility for any part of it. He knows how everything is supposed to work out, and it's kind of pride and arrogance. And once somebody is wounded and desperate and needs help, but demands help be a certain way and won't take any responsibility in getting better, it's really hard to help those people because there's just this huge wall. And people do that in church. God has to do it like this. It's like, once you say that, it's really hard to help those kind of people. And so, there was a gentleman too that I'd heard him share really hard stuff, and it was like you wanted to reach out, but he had so many barriers and walls that it was not possible to even get through to where you could help. And that's more the kind of situation that's really difficult, when they won't let you help because of their own pride and arrogance. And a lot of times those people are left without having many resources because they've kind of closed them. Did that answer it enough?
Kind of. I guess mostly what I'm wondering is, like, is there a way to, or maybe alternative to, trying to tell somebody, again, whether working as an advocate or just like...
No, because I do this stuff in my normal life all the time, yeah.
Sure. Kind of tell them, like, I want to be here for you, but I also can't, like, be as involved as I want because of a different emotional crisis or your own, like, emotional connection to the crisis in question. How do you...
navigate that?
How do you balance wanting to be there for them, but also recognizing your own
limitation? Mm-hmm. Okay, I got that. Thanks. I would do it almost like you described it. That I want to help, but because of the way things are lining up, or because of my own stuff in this moment, I just can't help. That's kind of what you're asking, right? Mm-hmm. And that happens, mostly it happens, and that's why I answered it the way I did the first time. Mostly, if I can't connect with somebody, I can't help them usually. If they're so closed off, I can't help them. Some people I can help if I have enough time to figure out how to do that. And, I'm in part of a men's group. I lead a lot of what we do. Mostly it's facilitating what we do. And at different times we've had different people in the group that, like, the Bible Answer Man shows up and somebody shares their heart with a thing and he wants to throw a Bible verse on it and solve their problem so he can feel okay about himself. But, and after they do it a few times, then it's my job to meet with him and tell him this is what you're doing and it's not okay. But I don't want to meet with him because I don't like what he does. So that's kind of what you're describing, right? It's like, you need help, but I can't help you. But if I can figure out a way to internalize it for me, usually I can jump across that gap. And how I did it with that guy was just to describe how he behaves and how I had behaved like that in the past. And that allowed me to care for him. But if there's no way to do it, I try and find somebody else that can reach out to him, or find a way for someone else to figure out a way to get to them. And that was even this guy. Several people were ready to go punch him. And I was like, well, I'll navigate that. And so I was able to figure it out, but it took a lot of thought and a lot of prayer to figure it out. Yes?
So a little bit earlier you talked about how there's different groups that agree for domestic violence, and then there's you guys and the investigators and the officers and all that kind of stuff. I'm not even the victim, and I feel very overwhelmed by all these people. So when do you know when the helping is doing more harm than
Oh, no, that's, yeah, in this kind of situation, you're being thrown a lot of stuff in this moment. So it is. And the way you can really tell that best is the people start to shut down. You know, you're there, you're helping, you're giving them what they need, and it can be overwhelming, the resources and the availability and the information. It can be overwhelming. So you just see that they start to shut down and pull back. And then since they're leading and I'm following, then I start to back off and just give them space and allow them to reach out as much as they want to reach out. But yeah, it's about boundaries. We were talking about before. Other questions? William Faulkner has a quote, "The past isn't dead, it isn't even past. All of our past is right here with us in the moment all the time." And that's really important to remember, because that stuff jumps out all the time. And it's really hard to deal with. That's some of the hardest stuff. Domestic violence calls were some of the hardest ones, because usually the woman was beaten up and you're there, and statistically normally the woman leaves 7 times before she leaves for good. So if you're there and you know she's left only twice, you know she's probably going to leave 4 more times after this one before she really leaves for good. And it's really hard to support people in that, and especially since it gets so twisted up in this codependent relationship. And that's kind of why the therapy is good. That helps people walk through and figure out what's going on, because in the moment you can't figure it out. And it is crazy. I remember one call where a woman was beaten up, but her husband took off and the police were looking for him, but she was worried about him being arrested because he was her soulmate. I was like, oh my gosh, what do you do with that? It's pretty challenging. Pretty challenging to figure stuff out. Another thing that happens a lot in calls is that the present pain attaches to past pain, and kind of like you were alluding to, you know, the present pain that's gone on and the immediate things that have happened have connected with a lot of other pain that's out there, and it causes a great deal of extra pain. I think we're close, right? Should be wrapping up. Okay. I will leave you with 2 things. One was from a speech that Pericles, the Greek guy, gave to this thing of the war dead, the Athenian war dead, and he gave it in a eulogy. And it says, "What we leave behind is not what is engraved in stone monuments, but what we've woven into the lives of the people that we've been with." And I think that's really, really, really important, that our connections with other people and with life is really an important part of everything we do. And that's what we got to do as advocates, and that's how we got to care for other people. Any other final questions? Okay.
Great, thank you, John. You hang around for a little bit?
Yeah, oh yeah, no, for sure.
Okay.
All kinds of stuff.
All right, let's take a break. 3 o'clock, back at 10 after, and we'll start up again.